What's up, guys? This is Scott Augustine for cardrunners.com doing my first video. You might know me better online as iRock Hose on Full Tilt and ND Scott on PokerStars. And so for my first video, I decided to do some heads-up action. I basically just recorded a bunch of random sessions over the last few days and tried to find some interesting spots and play some opponents for a little while just to get some history built up. And none of the opponents I played in these videos had I played before, and so I was seeing them for the first time that you guys will be seeing them. So I started with no real reads. This was the probably maybe fifth, sixth hand that Slop and you and I have played. Nothing of note has happened. You'll see that when he checks back this flop, I think he has a hand like worse nine a lot of the time, maybe pocket fives, a lower pocket pair, maybe an ace 10. And I think when he checks back that flop, I have the best hand on the turn just a ton of the time. So I think that's a clear value bet there. The river is a little thinner, and I decided to go ahead and value bet again. And the reason is, at the start of the match, I want to show to him that I am value betting very thinly. And I don't need king-queen to value bet this river. I'll value bet it with ace-9, even though the flush draw got there, the straight draw got there. And even though he looks me up with a river 2 pair, I want him to have it in the back of his head that he's just not going to be able to see a lot of free rivers. When he's calling a turn bet from me, a lot of the time there's going to be a river bet. Or maybe if I check, maybe I'll check raise. There's a lot. I want him to constantly worry about all streets of betting in each hand instead of just kind of lulling into some pot control lines that he exhibits later on, which I think he loses a lot of value on by just kind of always pot controlling, always keeping pots under $300 unless you've got the nuts. And it's just not going to translate unless you're playing someone very bad into profitable extraction from your marginal hands, and that's where a lot of your value comes from in heads-up play. On the river there, you see that I overbet the turn, and that's just kind of to screw with his head a little bit, just mess with him, say I've got an open-ender. I don't think he had much there when he checks twice to me. I do a delayed continuation bet because the board's kind of scary on the flop, and I want to see what he's going to do and check call twice. I don't want him to check call the flop and then have like a gut shot and then I give up and showdown 7 high. I think I have a better percentage of time taking it down by delay c-betting there. And I overbet, as I said, just to kind of screw with him. This is an important hand, and it's the reason I started the video when it's like this. I cascade tables. I two different opponents and cascade the tables, and it's kind of a little harder to see than later on when I put them side by side, and I'm a little more used to using Camtasia. But I think we really need to see this hand in order to understand why hands later on in the match happen with flopping you. And so he checks back the flop. And when he does this, I think he has a lot of marginal hands. Like, he takes a lot of pocket control lines. And so I think he has a lot of marginal hands, like maybe something similar to my hand, like an ace-10. He could have a 4-5, maybe a pocket sixes, maybe an ace-3, but I don't think he has a draw very often. And the reason is he can't have the nut draw, and so if he has a draw, it's probably a fairly marginal draw, like maybe 9-10 of hearts or 5-6 offsuit, something like that. And so he wants to bet since those have no showdown value, or at least a competent opponent I'd assume would want to bet, since those hands have no real showdown value against my flatting range on this board. And so when I lead here, I think he calls a lot, and then I can double barrel the river. But he raises. And when he raises, as I said, the range of hands I'm putting him on just does not include many flushes. Sometimes he'll show up with like 3x of hearts or something like that. But again, I just think a lot of players at this level would just go ahead and bet that because they're flop equity. And so I decide to make a very over-aggressive move and shove on the turn. And I think I can get him to fold a lot of hands that raise there for him that are in the range of like King Jack without a heart, King Queen, maybe even some random two pairs like 3-4. Because from his perspective, what's he really beating with, let's say, 3-4 or King 4 that I'm willing to just bet shove on this turn with? And he ends up having the Queen High flush, which really surprises me because I would have thought that's a hand that he bets on the flop 90% of the time at the start of a match, just because I've given him no reason to be defensive with his draws, and he doesn't have a ton of showdown value against my calling range there pre-flop. And so I think he should be betting that flop regardless. And you could say, well, he stacked me when a heart come, it worked out. Well, yeah, but I'm just maybe 5% of the time going to be making that move, maybe even less, against the guy who I have no history with. And so you just can't depend on that's where your value is coming from with that draw. You have to make up some of the value to get from that draw by just taking down the pot when I have the best hand, when I'm folding ace high on that flop. And then on the very next hand, I raise flop trip eights and bet it very aggressively on all streets and pretty quickly, trying to convey this tilted image of I'm just wanting to get my money back. I don't care about the money. I find a lot of players at 5-10 tilt significantly more than the next level up at 10-20, and especially much more than 25-50 players. And so I think it's much more believable that I'm tilted for him. And I think if a king doesn't come there on that later on, I think I get paid off a much better percentage of the time. I bring up a table in the bottom right, which is what I was talking about with the cascading. And this player sat with $500. I've never played him before. Though that's kind of misleading because it's been a while. It's been a while since I've been playing regularly in these 5-10 games, and so these guys might just be random regulars that I don't know. Slopping You might be playing heads up at 5-10 every day, and or this could be his shot as a 3-6 regular or something. My initial reads on each player is that Nakul Chimp is either a recreational player or is taking a shot or is used to a different game. 5-10 heads up, I would just say, is almost never going to be his standard game. Where Slopping You, there's a good chance that 5-10 heads up is his game of choice. And so I 3-bet in the top left here with King, Queen of Diamonds. I haven't been 3-betting really much at all, and I have that an aggressive image in his mind of a little crazy, and I think he's going to be defending kind of light against me. And then I flop the nut flush, and when he raises, you might want to kind of slow play and not blow him off whatever hand he has. But against a player with my image, when he raises, he's just signaling me, I want to get the money in. And obviously I want to get the money in. And so I want to just not give it a chance to have the turn come a 10 of diamonds and he makes a big fold with what he ends up having, which was ace queen. I don't want to lose that value. I have to grab that value and take advantage of my little crazier image that I paid for with that ace-10 hand, and now that's come to fruition with that king-queen hand. Not saying that he probably wouldn't stack off there a decent amount of the time with ace-queen, but I think he's stacking off there with a lot less than ace-queen against my image. Maybe not a lot less, but he's definitely not folding an ace, he's not folding sets, lower flushes, but he's also not folding a lot of random hands they might float with that my image could garner from that ace-10 hand. This guy, Cool Chimp on the right, this is an important hand. He checks back the flop after min-raising pre-flop, and then min-raises me on the turn. I don't know what this means. If I had to make a wild guess, I would say he has a hand like 3-5 or 5-6, but I call just kind of to see what he's going to do on a lot of variety of rivers. And then when the river comes, the pot's 200, it completes the flush draw, and it makes the top card trips. I really have no idea what he could have here. Maybe a flush draw, I don't know. I just decided to look him up for a third of a pot bet, and he ends up having a full house. And I think this tells us a lot about this player when you might just like look at that hand if you're not as used to heads up and be like, oh, this player's bad, he underbets his hands, whatever. We can look at a couple more, garner a few more bits of information from this hand, though. First, he's not folding anything from the button, ever. He min-raised 10-3 offsuit. It's just like the very bottom range of all hands. And later on, he's limping hands. He's just never folding from the button. So whenever he raises or whatever, we can just include all hands in his range. And then another thing to keep in mind is that he checked back top and bottom pair, which in his mind is just like a pat hand, which on that board it probably is, but there's still some hands where I could crack him easily that he's losing value from, like my hand. If a king comes on the turn, a lot of time, maybe I'll check call one street and not check call two, where I would have check called the flop and the river, and the turn, or maybe I check call the flop or check raise the flop. He's just missing value on that board, and he won't have a hand a lot of the time, and so he needs to charge me when I'm going to peel light there, and when I had top pair, he was losing value unless I bet it aggressively like I did. But he has no way of knowing that I was going to do that, so in general, he wants to start his line in order to get value from my hands and not have me be valuing myself into these hands. I raise on the bottom right, and I just kind of play for pot control here. The board is just not conducive to gain value from really any hands I can even think of. He ends up having ace-9. I don't think he's folding that, and I think he's definitely calling at least 2 streets, and I'm not looking to turn bottom pair into a 3-street bluff against this guy right now. So he works up a little bit off that full house hand, and he min-3 bets me there when I have nothing. And so he's worked up already to $330 of profit. And psychologically, how much someone is up and down in a heads-up match, I think plays a ton of role in how they're playing. It's a lot different if you go up 500 and then you lose 500 than if you've just been at the same level the entire time. Like if he goes up to 1,000, which he eventually does, and then now loses it back down to 400 or something, he's much more deflated than if he would have bought in for 500, and we've just kind of been battling back and forth, and now he was up to 600, he's down to 400, we're just kind of seesawing a little bit. And so I think though a lot of emphasis just needs to be put on the psychological aspects of heads up. And I show Slopping You a pot control line here that I haven't showed him yet, and I just wanted to show him a variety of lines and always have him guessing as to what I have. Pretty basic poker ideas there. But I check behind the turn because I don't think he has a draw very often. I just don't think he has much. And I think maybe on the river I can make a small bet and get some value, but then he leads a min bet. And it looks like it's to induce or something, but I just don't think he ever plays a jack like this or a straight or any real strong hand. So I think his best possible hand here would be like pocket sevens, and he's just not going to have that very often. But I think I can get value out of a raise when he can put me on a misdraw or just spazzing out when he just min bets. And he can be like, oh, I trapped him, and he has 10x, which I think is a very predictable hand for him to have there with how he played it. So standard open for me up top left. I'm opening a ton of buttons on both tables just because of how passive both players are. And I go and rearrange the tables a little. Alright, so we rearranged the tables a little bit. I think it's going to work out a little better. And then we just continue to raise just a ton of buttons against Slopping You. He really hasn't been 3-betting us with any sort of reasonable percentage. If he has been, it's been negligible. And then I get min 3-bet by Nikulchimp, and he's kind of gaining a little momentum. I just call once because I think he'll shut down with like his king-jack hands or whatever on the turn. and he doesn't shut down. I toy around with raising here, but I just don't think it's going to show a profit. And so I just kind of release it there. And he's doubled the stack from the start, and that's fine. I think he's going to stick around now that he hasn't left. If he was going to leave, I think he would have left a little bit ago. I 3-bet aces on the left. It's a little unfortunate that I haven't been 3-betting a lot at all, so that Slop and You hasn't gotten curious enough to make moves against those aces. But when I'm in control of this match, I just don't want to build big pots out of position against a stronger range than I'm going to be doing it with very often against him. Now that I have the momentum, I don't want to do anything to really upset that momentum, including 3-betting very light and kind of getting it in marginal situations where he has like ace-queen and I've got pocket nines and I allow him to get back in the match. He leads. Cool Chimp leads here on all 3 streets. He has a marginal hand. I call on the river. I call on the turn because I think I have the best hand enough. I call on the river just kind of to see what he has. And he shows up with a hand that I guess it makes sense in his mind, but I can't really make sense of it. On the left, it looks like Slopping You is getting a little frustrated with what I'm doing here because he tanks a little bit, thinks about it, and then goes ahead and 4-bets me. And I have king, so I'm just going to shove there. I don't want him to flat, really. Flatting 4-bets is a pretty hard range to balance in general. And I don't want to flat when he has like pocket jacks or queens, and then an ace comes, then we play pot control because that's what he likes to do with his lines. And then I lose value from those. And if he's got like ace king or aces or something, I'm getting it in anyway on almost every flop. And I don't think if he's bluffing with a hand like ace-5, he's just going to be open shoving any flop. I think he's going to be kind of check folding or just checking behind a lot of hands unless he outdraws me. And so I think I can get the most value easily by shoving there. And then on this right table, the Cool Chimp leads again on kind of a drawy board. I think if he had a big hand here, he'd go for the check raise. And his leads are very big. And it looks like he just wants me out of this hand. And I'm not sure what he has, but by the river when he checks, I just think I have the best hand all the time. I don't think he's ever checking a queen. He's never checking all these hands. Two flush draws missed. And I think sometimes I'd best bet a little bit. And this bet has 2 benefits. Sometimes he looks me up with a hand like ace-9 or 10-9 or whatever. But not as often enough to make that bet worthwhile. But I think it's also a good play just so that he doesn't see what I'm looking him up there with. I don't really want him to see my cards in that scenario. There's certain instances where I want the opponent to see my cards, or I want to see his cards more than I care about him seeing my cards, and that just wasn't one of those instances. I just didn't want him to see that I had a Jack-7 there. On the left, I float out of position on this flop to his continuation bet. I think he's continuation is betting this flop with his entire range. I think king high is ahead a decent amount there. And my plan was I have my gut shot as backup, and obviously I hit it on the river. But even if I didn't, I wasn't calling the flop to hit my gut shot. I was calling the flop to represent a wider range of made hands that could thinly value bet the river. And this is set up by the fact that I was value betting thin with that ace-9 hand at the very start of the match, a couple of other thin value bets that, like raising his min bet with that ace-6, and when he's doing this, he's just going to auto-release hands that beat king-9, but by the river, he's just going to think they can never be any good. He would think I check-raise my draws on the flop, and my hand just looks a lot like king-jack or maybe ace-10 or something going for thin value there that he just can't fight back with when he has his pocket 7s or something. Sometimes he'll just immediately put me on a missed draw, but I haven't been playing my draws like that, so if he's been noticing at all, then I think that's going to be a very profitable float out of position. On the flop over here on the right, I flop top and bottom, and he min check raises me. He's been screwing around a lot with me ever since, and he still hasn't won any of these hands, so I think he's getting a little frustrated. And if I just flat this flop here. I think he barrels a lot more of his range. Obviously, it keeps all his strong hands in, which I'm isolating by raising anyway. But I don't think he's min-check raising any draws or anything. So I don't think I have a ton to worry about on this hand. I think his range is very polarized to 9x, seeing where it's at, maybe pocket sevens. And then if a blank comes on the turn and he's got like 9x, I think he bets a lot of the time again to protect his hand in his mind. And so when I 3-bet that flop, though, I think he just immediately releases a ton of his range, and I just isolate his strong hands. And I just don't think that's going to be as profitable as flatting there with the position. And we don't even have 100 big blind stacks. So if he does have a hand like King Queen, I won't have a problem getting it in by the river against this guy. I'm just kind of negating my positional advantage there, and it's not going to work out as well as flatting, I think, in the long run. I 3-bet ace-6 offsuit on the left. I haven't really shown that I've been 3-betting light at all, and then it's kind of a tricky flop, but I think he's going to just flat with a lot of his hands, and then I can double barrel him off them, or he's going to raise me, and I think he raises me here. He may be making a move sometimes, but I just don't think he is a lot of times. I think a lot of times he has a hand like pocket tens there, something that he's definitely not folding if I shove, so it's an easy release there. Now this Jack 10 hand on the right is one of the more interesting hands of the day. It's an important concept when you are playing a player who's kind of, every heads-up player you just kind of have to take as unique, and you have to just realize what lines he's going to think someone would take for value and what lines are going to be bluffs. And so earlier in the match, we remember that 10-3 offsuit hand, and he checked behind on even a little more drawy board, even though it was pretty dry still. It was more dry than a King 7 texture, and he checked behind right away. And that, coupled with the fact that he's been getting out of line here, I just think I can float out of position here, and when I float here, I add all kings to my range. I just have all these kings here, and I have strong hands, and I have also some ace-high hands, some pocket fives, whatever. But when he's betting this flop, his range is just so weak for this. He's been spazzing out a little bit. He might have a hand like ace-10, something like that he's betting, but I just don't think he's betting any of his super strong hands. So when I check call here, it represents that I have either a 7 or a strong hand. And then my plan was to check on the turn. And these lines are pretty blatantly obvious against players that I don't think are on the same heads-up skill level as I am. Against players that I think are really good and are really just floating me all the time, putting me to test, we're always deep, and I just never know if my mid pair is good. I'm stuck calling down with weak top pairs. Against those type of aggressive players and such, these lines should just be used few and far between, because they will be balancing their ranges, and they will be betting their king x's on this flop here, and they will be double barreling when they don't have king x, and they will be doing all these things, and they'll be bluff shoving you a lot and stuff like that. And so, but against passive opponents where you can really narrow down their range by street how they react to everything you do and how the board changes, then these lines become extremely profitable. And this is another reason you have to be balancing your ranges and getting an aggressive image. I just don't think this guy ever bets king x on the flop, pocket sevens, something like that, any of his made hands. So in his mind, how I play king is I'd check call and then I check raise big. And so I think his hand range for bet calling that turn there is marginal hands that are going to release on the river, such as 7x, pocket 8, something like that, or draw hands that are trying to get there and crack my king. And so when all the draws miss, I don't think my jack high is strong enough to go check. He might have like a queen high flush draw or something. And so I just shove there to push pretty much his entire range out, unless he spiked like pocket fives or something. And that'd just be pretty unlucky for this line. But he does fold, and that's a fairly big turning point in the match, because he never really gets any more steam or momentum in this match. And like I said before, it's just a much more deflating situation. He's playing much more reckless and wild now than he was when he bought in for 500 and slowly moved his stack up to 1,000. And so he's min raising here. I'm just defending with king high. I'm not sure exactly what my cutoff would be here. I'm definitely dropping my cutoff for defending here because he's playing a little more erratic recently. And you'll notice Slopping You on the left just took another pot control line. And you also notice Nakul Chimp bet the same amount on the flop and the turn with a draw. And then that becomes prevalent in this immediate next hand. He bet 20 on the turn with a draw. And then I check behind this flop just because I think I have the best hand a lot, but I don't think I get a lot of value unless he has exactly a heart draw or a worse ace high from hands. I don't think he's floating me with king jack or any hands that I'm going to get value from. And so I can make more money by just checking behind. And if it kind of breaks out in bad fashion, if the turn's a heart and then the river's a king, I can just get to showdown easily. The turn's a 6, and I bet, and he calls. I bet 20, like I'm on the draw, like he was before. Again, just kind of in his head, thinking of what lines he'd take with certain hands. And I think he'd lead the turn with, he'd weak lead the turn with a top pair hand a lot there. And so when he check calls, he has a hand like pocket eights, pocket sevens, an ace high hand, or a heart draw, I think, as his primary range. I think he check raises or check min raises or does whatever he does with strong hands with a 6 there on the turn a lot of the time, just almost always. And so I'm not putting him on a queen. I'm not putting him on trip sixes or better. And so when I spike my jack on the river, I just think I have the best hand 100% of the time. And so he leads here for a substantial amount of the pot compared to how he has been value betting. And a lot of heads-up players, I think, especially at 5-10 and below, might think, okay, hearts missed, I have enough equity to snap him off here, easy call. And yes, it's a fine call, but I think you're missing value if you're not raising here against this particular player. And the reason is we just established this range as no queens, no trip sixes or better, and he has either missed hearts, pocket eights, something like that. And since hearts missed, I can rep missed hearts myself. And whenever there's a misdraw against a player who can't really hand read particularly well, as I assume Nakul Chimp hasn't been able to recently, then you can just immediately, especially if it's a flush draw, you can immediately just rep that draw on one street, and they'll just call you down light. They might release on a couple of later streets, but on one street they're just be like, okay, hearts are out there, I'll call them. And he either has missed hearts, a mid-range pocket pair, or he might have spiked a jack with like king jack of hearts or something. And now if I had if I had jack 10 here, my kicker doesn't play for the jack, and I think this leans much more towards a call. But since I have ace jack here, I can get value from king jack, I can get value from jack 10 of hearts, jack 9 of hearts, all these hands where he'll just snap me off because I check behind on the turn, and I'm not really repping much in his head. And so I decided to make a small value raise here. And I think I'm gaining $90 of value here where not a lot of regulars at this level would think to against this opponent. They just be like, wow, he's passive, he's bad, he could have random air. But they're not really looking at exactly what hands he could have. And he does end up having king jack of hearts, which is one of the hands I was definitely pinpointing for extracting value. And now I've just kind of ground him down to $200. I'm trying to just close him out now and kind of hoping he rebuys out of spite or just kind of tries to clear out his account. He's playing much more passive from the button here, and so I'm not sure exactly what that means. He might be waiting for a hand to go all in, so I'll kind of just dance around until that happens. On the left, nothing's really been going on for a while. We've just kind of been keep going up a little bit, just kind of seesawing back and forth. Because he plays so many pot control lines, I'm just always the one driving the action, and I'm really in control of the match. I'm in check raise on the right there. I'm not exactly sure why I did that. It doesn't make much sense, but it's not really going to be unprofitable. It's just going to be just not good nor bad on the right there. On the left, I think I make a mistake on the turn here. And at the time, I thought, okay, I check call the flop because he's c-betting just all the time. When he's not made, he's c-betting a lot. And so he's c-betting a lot of hands like King Jack, Jack 10 that I think he'll shut down with, and I can just get to showdown with. And he hasn't been c-betting his draws very often, as not nearly as often as I expect a regular at these stakes too. And so basically, when he bets, he's representing like a queen or a good pocket pair, and he's just not going to have those a lot. So then I float the flop, and the turn brings my 8 pairs my kicker, and like from an objective view, you might be like, oh, okay, that's a great card. Now I almost always have the best hand. Well, that's true, except when he bets. When he bets on this turn, I think if he has spades, a straight draw, or hearts, he's checking right behind on this turn. Just he's shown his propensity to just play draws passively, and just he's not going to be betting this turn with spades or hearts. And I need him to be betting this turn with spades, hearts, straight draws, random air he's double barreling, or or he needs to be value betting thinly with like 10-8, 9-8, something like that, to make my check call on the turn profitable. I don't think either of those scenarios are met, and so I think the turn is actually check fold, as weird as it looks. And even though I'm looking up people with like ace high and stuff here, and he shows tens, which it's the draw hitting saved me money. I think he should value bet that river always. On the right, I flop just a hand with equity against basically his whole range. He ends up having like one of the worst hands possible for me to be up against, but that's okay. I'm not folding there for 20 big blinds at these stakes. Whenever he's been limping, he's been limp calling, so I'm just going to just do it with all my value hands. It's just raise. I'm not going to be raising lightly with hands that have a hard time winning at showdown, because I think I'll get to showdown a lot when he limp calls if I just c-bet and then I just shut down. He min 3-bets me again. I hit top pair, but I'm going to check it behind. When he checks here, I don't think he's check folding a lot ever, and I don't think I'm going to get enough value from worst to make a bet profitable. Whereas I can let the board run out a little bit on the turn and kind of play a small pot. I've called once. The turn might even be a fold. It's just not a great board for my range compared to his range. And the river's a definite fold when he bets like that. I think he has 2 pair, set, straight, just always. Again, slopping you just checks right behind on this flop, and you just can't be giving up so many hands and expect to be profitable in the long run if heads up against good opponents. Even though I have this open ender and I have the club draw, I'd be betting this turn with ace-6 of hearts or whatever I showed up with there, just because he's just not balancing his ranges enough to warrant me not just stealing that turn every time when he checks behind on such a drawy board. The hand on the right's a little interesting, I guess. He limps, and we get a better idea of what his limping range is. And you check it down to the river, and then he decides to bet. And I toy around with raising, but then I realize I've got king high on a double pair board. He's not folding ace high, and I think I have the best hand enough to call, so I just do. And he's got a counterfeited pocket twos, so we can add pocket twos into his limping range, which is kind of surprising. I thought he'd be raising with that hand, but he just decides not to. I decide to lead out on the turn there, and he calls. I could probably profitably double barrel on that turn, or on that river. He's looking me up, appealing with a lot of ace highs, a lot of gut shots, whatever. And the king coming just isn't going to hit him very often. But I just decided to shut down. On the left, I don't decide to steal the turn because I think he'll be peeling with a lot of hands that beat me. He just doesn't know it. Like hands like king with the king of clubs, stuff like that. And so I don't want it to bet the turn, then have it go check on a blank river and him with king high. I think it's better if it goes check on the turn, that he'll more often have those king high hands, and I can bluff those out on the river easier than on the turn. He has ace-8, which surprised me, and I think he needs to be betting that to get value from my worst mid pairs and charge me for my draws. On the right here, I kind of just bet it small the whole way with my queen no kicker, and he ends up having a queen too. I thought about shoving that river actually because I think he never has an ace with the reads I was getting in terms of his bet sizing and how he was, and different times he was betting and stuff like that. I just never think he has better than a queen there, so I was thinking of trying to shove him off a chop, but then I decided to bet small and try to get value out of small pocket pairs or ace high. The turn on the right is an easy value bet, I think, and then he just folds. I want to get obviously charged on that coordinated board against worse hands. Still opening, I'd say maybe 90% of buttons against Slopping You, maybe even more. He's just never 3-betting me nearly enough to make it an unprofitable situation. And because he's so passive and plays so many pot control lines, I can really pinpoint his range after playing for a lot of hands with him and really start to just push him around a little bit. On the right here, he min bets. I check raise with top pair. I think that's kind of a mandatory check raise, or I could even lead. And then he calls. I don't think I'm really beat often when the turn comes, but I just don't think there's a ton of value in these hands. I don't think there's a ton of value in. I think he's calling a lot of my turn bets when he's ahead, and I'm just kind of giving him chips for no real reason. I think it's going to go check check a lot, and I'll have the best hand by the river a lot. But when I bet the turn, I think it just takes away a ton of his range that I beat, and just narrows it down to hands that beat me, like his gut shots that turned to top pair, his club draw that got there now, stuff like that. I wasn't planning on putting any more money into the pot after that turn came. He ended up having king 10 with the king of clubs, which I guess was one of few hands I could extract value from by betting the turn, but it's just, I don't think it's enough of his range to warrant a bet. Finally, Slopping You 3-bets me after opening all the buttons, and I just immediately release. If we were a little deeper and I had maybe like king 8-6 suited, I might snap flat there and then try to just stack him for a big hand because I think his range is very strong there. I decided to lead for the first time, which I think this was a good board to lead on against the kind of passive player because I think he'll look me up with hands weaker than he's willing to bet because we've shown that he's all about the pot control. And so I think he'll look me up a lot of hands like ace-jack on that flop that he won't bet himself, or hands like 9x, stuff like that. And so I think I'm grabbing some value there. I defend 5-7 of clubs on the left there. I think that's a little too loose. I just don't. I think I'll just have to take away the pot much more than I really want to have to make that profitable against this guy because he's just not stacking off in random situations. I get min 3-bet here on the right, and I actually get 3-bet on the left here. I defend the ace-jack suited. Against a lot of players, this is just a very standard defense. But since he's just been never 3-betting me, I'm just not real happy about. I think it's too strong to fold, but I'm not real thrilled about having the hand. And then I float the flop against the cool chimp. I'm not exactly sure why. I think I was planning on taking it away in a street or two later, and then I turn a pair, so I check it back, and then I river a straight, and he check calls, which I think is terrible on his part. He should be betting there for value to get value from my other hands. And on the right here is kind of an interesting hand. He leads, and I flop a double gutter, and so I call behind. I called twice, and then on the river, I just didn't think his leading range made up enough hands of like 2-pair, which would of king whatever, or a set, which would now be about, or top pair in itself. So I thought he might either have 8-6 or some sort of hand he was willing to fold or random air, like an ace high or something, that my jack just wasn't beating. So I decided to shove. And that bet has two purposes. The first is I'm getting a very good price on my bluff, and sometimes he will just fold his air. He'll fold his air, and he'll fold hands that just jack high doesn't beat, but he's not willing to call off there with. And but it also gives me a little more cushion to win his money back from him. And what I mean by that is it's kind of it gives when he has a larger stack, it gives me more room to maneuver. So when he has a stack of $564, it is much easier for me to stack him with a greater percent of equity than if he has $200. When you have $200, you're just there's not many times where you could just triple barrel, or you can't draw to hands. You can't do all these things just because there's just not enough money left behind to correctly do these things. But if he's not going to fold a lot of the time and he's looking to splash around a lot, then I'm looking to make hands and just charge him much higher for him. And I can draw to those hands in a much more correct fashion when his stack is larger. It's kind of like the idea in football where you take the delay of game for your punter so that you give him a little more yardage to maneuver with in before the end zone when he's punting. You just have a few more options whenever you're in hands with him, and it just becomes easier. In an extreme example, if you both have two big blinds, then it's going to be very hard for him not to have a ton of equity against you, no matter what you're pushing. Whereas if you both have 1,000 big blinds, then it's going to be a lot harder for the worst player to have a lot of equity when the majority of the money goes in. I flop top pair on the right. It's going to be a bet all three streets type of thing for me. I 3-bet on the left because I just haven't 3-bet in forever. It's more of a frequency thing than obviously the actual strength of my hand. I haven't been getting very big hands in the big blind, so I haven't even 3-betting hasn't even crossed my mind for value. So I thought this would start sort of open up a lot of avenues later on, and it actually does. This kind of actually becomes a turning point hand in the match, in my opinion. I flop a flush, which is obviously very lucky, and I make my standard c-bet against him that I have been in my previous pots, and I make it a little bigger. I was making it 130 earlier, I think, but we're a little deeper now, so I just make it a little bigger. It's not really it's kind of just a semantics issue. And the turn counterfeits my flush, but that's not a terrible thing. And the reason is, I think that since I have not been 3-betting him really often at all, when I 3-bet him pre-flop, especially this deep, he's just going to immediately release his hands that are like King Jack offsuit, King 10 offsuit, Queen 10 offsuit. All of these Broadway hands that maybe he'll call with like Ace King and Ace Queen, sometimes Ace Jack offsuit. But for the most part, it's going to be if he's calling with Broadway hands, they're going to be suited. I don't think he's going to be calling with too many suited connectors. He may be, and I may be a little off on that, but he just doesn't seem like the player that's going to be doing these sort of speculative things. I think his range is heavily rated towards Ace King, Ace Queen, hands like that, pairs like 9s, 10s, all the way down to like 7s, 6s, 5s. He might call all his pairs actually for set value just because we're so deep and he thinks my range is really strong. But in general, I just don't think his hands comprise, especially with the ace of diamonds coming, his hands comprise of a lot of hands that are King X, Queen X, Jack X of diamonds, where the other X is an unsuited card, which is what it would have to be for him not to raise this flop with me. He might be slow playing like a made flush, but I'll hear from him later on, and I'll know that I can release it because he's not just going to be wildly bluffing me. But I think there's definitely some value. I checked the turn for some information about what he has, and I don't think I'm going to get all three streets here, and I think it looks a little fishier when I check the turn and then I bet the river here when the board really hasn't changed from the turn to the river. And I bet about 2/3 pots. He snaps me off with pocket sevens with the 7 of diamonds, which I think is a fine way to play his hand, I guess. I don't really see anything wrong with it. But I definitely think I can squeeze some value, even out of hands like Ace 10, hands like that. Obviously, lower sets are probably going to look me up. And I don't think he ever has me beat there often enough. I don't think he has me beat there often enough to not bet, compared to when I have him beat and he'll look me up. Nikulchit sits out a little bit, then he comes back. I see bet here on the left, and I think this is a bad check call by slopping. Now, a lot of people might be like, okay, well, he ends up having, I'll just show you what it has before I analyze it. I raise up, he just check call, he calls with eights, and then he check calls a flop, king, queen, seven, all diamonds. Now, the problem with this is, even against my terrible hand, I had 9-6 of 9-6 offsuit. I have one over, and I have a flush draw, and he's never going to be putting money in himself unless an 8 comes, and one of the 8s is going to be the 8 of diamonds, giving me the winning hand. So even when I have, a lot of times I'll have like queen X here, king X, a high diamond, and maybe 2 overs to his 8s. Whenever he's opening himself up to a ton of double barrels, and if I knew he was calling with pocket 8s on this flop, I definitely would just double and then triple barrel the hell out of him. But even on this flop, when I have 9-6 offsuit with the 6 of diamonds and he's calling with pocket 8s, I have 12 outs to beat him, even with the very bottom of my terrible range. And so at best, he's got 55% equity, and that's when he gets to see showdown. And a ton of the time, I'm just never going to let him see showdown if he's calling with hands like that. I double barrel the cool chimp on the right. I just don't think his hands included a lot of those hands, hands that hit that turn and flop hard enough with how pre-flop went and such. On the left, I check raise because I haven't been check raising a lot. I think I can get a lot of folds off of like pocket 5s and stuff. And he's just been c-betting his marginal hands, or a polarized range. So I think I can get him off of hands like, I don't know, ace-x that decided to c-bet, or some of his made hands will pot control. So I'm not too worried about those hands. So I think he has a very strong hand when he calls here. But on that board, a very strong hand is a lot of times just 9x, or maybe even ace-7, just getting a little frustrated with things I'm doing. And so I double barrel the turn just because I pick up the flush draw, and the king is just a great double barrel card. I don't think his range has a ton of kings in it. If it does, he has to have made 2 pair, and I river the straight, and that's obviously the best possible outcome for me because it's the sneakiest of the draws that I can have. Even though the backdoor flush draw would also be pretty sneaky. And I think this hand exhibits a real good reason why you shouldn't play such pot control and passive lines all the time. And I just close that table out here because my full tilt starts going crazy. And the reason is I shove here because I think, oops. I shove here because I think whatever he's calling me with on the turn, if I didn't hit on the river, I was just going to give up. The only reason I really double barreled the turn was the turn was just such a great card for both my hand's equity and to gain fold equity. And I shove the river just because how that river comes, I have about a pot-sized bet left, and I just don't think there's any hands that he has that he's calling the turn with and then folding to that specific river. And so I end up going to check what he has, and he ends up having king 9, which is top 2 pair. Now, at first you might be like, wow, he should have shoved that turn or raised that turn or did something there. And with someone with a different image, that's definitely the best play a lot of the time. The problem is he is just so passive with everything that he's been doing up till now that he is just going to get such little value when he raises that turn. I basically have to have like 9-7 for him to get value from a worse hand on that turn. And so when that happens, like he his whole game works around the fact that he pot controls and plays very passive. So then when he does have a big hand, he has to depend on me betting and then also me not having him beat to gain value in huge pots. And that's just not going to be a profitable way to play in the long run. He min raises here after I uh, 3-bet him pre-flop. Yeah. I 3-bet him pre-flop on the left here, and he min check raises. I just raise on the right to just take the pot down on kind of a crazy board. Um, he he does another small raise on the left in this thing, and that's either telling me, to me that looks like he's either getting frustrated and wants to try to take it down as a bluff, which I don't think happens very often for him, but it might. He could have a hand like 6-7 or some sort of hand like that, pocket sevens, something like that, that wants to see where he's at. And in those first two scenarios, he's just almost always going to shut down, I think, and on the turn. And he's laying me a huge price, like 5-1 or something like that, 4-1, 4.51. And I decide to just peel one just to see what he's going to do on the turn. And then it's unfortunate for him that I just turn my set. And then when I do turn my set, I was planning on check folding a lot of turns. I just kind of wanted to see what he was going to do on the turn. And it was a pretty cheap price just to see what he was going to do. And he shoves, and I snap. And he ends up having Queen Jack, which he's starting to play his top pair hands for stacks. And that's going to be dangerous for him because it really doesn't fit into his game well. I called there that one bet with the eights, but he wasn't getting more value out of me there. So I don't think I'm looking him up on his turn shove with worse often enough to make that turn shove good for him. And so since he doesn't seem to be too used to playing these big pots for value, on the right it goes check to the river, and I try to get a little value out of my queen, and he min raises me. So I think, and he settled down a little bit since his spazzy period, so I think he just made like a straight with Jack 9, Ace Jack, maybe 2-pair with Queen 6 or something, or his river to flush, something much better than a queen, so I think that's an easy muck. And now we start to get into a point where slop and use starts to tilt a little bit. And this is really what you want in heads-up matches. When you have a player who starts off very tight, kind of plays small pots, and is just not used to an aggressive game where stacks are just flying all around, and then he gets stuck a couple buy-ins, and then he tries too hard to win those buy-ins back. And so he starts to tilt a little bit, and he tries to just win every pot. And he starts defending 3-bets light, he starts 4-bet bluffing, stuff like that. On the right, I flop the nuts. You might want to slow play against this guy like I was talking about earlier with that Queen 2 hand, but I think that's a little different because he leads here, and instead of check raising, and this flop is just so draw heavy that I just think he's never lead folding anything he's doing for value. He might have some random bluff hands, but I'm not going to make that much when he's double barrels the turn, as I am when he has like King X or King Jack or whatever, and I can just stack him right here. And the river, I thought might counterfeit me, but he is King 8, and he had 35 big blinds. I guess it's alright to stack off a top pair there. The problem is he's not too self-aware of his image. If he was more self-aware, he would think to himself, well, I underbet a lot of pots and I underdo a lot of these things for value. He probably isn't raising a draw here, and if he's not raising a draw, he probably has King 8B, but he just kind of just looked at his hand, said I have top pair, and we're going to just throw it all in and see what happens, and didn't work out for him. And then we start to one table, slapping you a little bit. Here's a hand where I just acknowledge that he was tilted. I 3-bet him again, and then the flop comes out pretty well for me. If I had a hand like ace queen here or something, I definitely would not be c-betting this flop, just because I think there's too many hands. He's peeling me way too light to ever fold to this flop. But because I do in fact have a value hand, I'm just playing this for stacks easily here. And notice that he makes it, instead of his normal value range of like 250 or 240 or of earlier, and this would be 260 was a min raise, he he made it to 270 on my 130, where he was basically min raising before, which I don't know. I might be a little off on that, and he might just do that as his standard. But I thought at the time I thought it might be a little indicative that he had a draw. But I just shove it in here, and he tanks a little bit and calls, and he shows 6-9 of hearts when I bring it up, which is just a telltale sign, and he instantly rebuys. When you're in his position here, just unless you're very used to heads up and you have a very good read on him and you're just getting kind of unlucky, just quit this match. He has 6-9 of hearts there. He's defending for 100 big blinds to my 3-bets, where I'm not even 3-betting crazy, and he's not aggressive enough to take away hands later on. He had to have basically flopped a draw to be raising that flop. If the flop came like ace something something, I don't think he's raising me ever. If it came king something something, I don't think he's raising me. I just think he's going to be stacked so often when he's not ahead there and hardly ever get my money or push me off the worst hand there with how I'm reading him right now. And so I think that's just a really terrible defend with the 9-6 of hearts. And then, I mean, once he flops that draw, he's got to basically just hope I'm c-betting random air or ace king or something that missed, and then if I don't, just hope to hit your draw. And it's just a lot of hoping is in that thing, and it's more like gambling instead of controlling the heads-up match, where I'm basically just controlling what he does, and it's just not going to work out too well for him. I'm going to click it ahead here a couple instances. We play a lot of meaningless pots where he whittles me down like 100 maybe, and then I'm going to take it down to another spot. Okay, so jumping ahead here just a little bit. I find this guy at 3-6 who was sitting at one of the tables I was sitting at before, and I just been blinded out, or just someone tried to sit with me and I didn't pay attention and I just was removed from the table, something like that. So I had this table up randomly, and he seemed to be just sitting there alone waiting for action, so I assumed he's more of a 3-6 regular. I don't know if heads up is his main game, or maybe he plays a mix of 6 max or whatever. I haven't seen him at higher limits, so I'd assume he's a 3-6 regular at best. And generally recreational players aren't just waiting at tables by themselves, and so I'd assume he's going to be fairly competent. And you'll notice that he plays much, much more aggressive pre-flop than either of our previous opponents. And it's to the point where he just overdoes it. And you just have to be adaptive to everyone's different styles. Like against these passive people, I've been playing kind of aggro, kind of crazy, value betting thin. Where against this over aggro player, I'm just going to really just kind of trap him and just induce a lot of things by taking some trickier lines and taking some lines that he may not expect. And the fact that he's 3-betting me so much, it leads me to believe that he's more of a competent player at these stakes, but not he doesn't have as good a concept on selective aggression as he does just blind aggression. And on the left there, I c-bet, and I notice my c-betting size is smaller. I think I don't have to c-bet 40 or 50 to take down this pot as much as I just do 30. Just look at for the texture of King 4-2 with no flush draw. He check raises, and I think this is air a lot, and I think this is King X or better a lot. And so in that regard, I can just float here with my draw, and when he checks the turn, I'm trying to get him off some air. I make an undersized bet of 100. I think it should be a little higher, maybe like 160, just to be a little more credible that I have like a king-queen hand or something, because I don't think I'd really bet 100 here with any made hands, so I think this is a little too small. But I think I can get away there with like 160 and just fold out his ace-5 hands or whatever. And then when he calls, I river a pair, but I'm almost never good. But I'm just done with the hand. I don't think he's ever going to fold once the pot's here and he's a little tilted. On the right, I decide to check raise with my backdoor flush draw, my overcard, and my gut shot. I think my hand's too strong to fold, and I think it's going to be too hard to play to a call, and I haven't really shown any aggression to get back at him with, so I can kind of formulate an aggressive image of my own and kind of skew my ranges in his head to more aggro than he thinks. Now, on the right, yeah, he had king 9 on the left, and I just was never going to get him off that hand. Kind of surprised me that he check raised with even as weak as king 9, but that's fine. And then on the right, he's been 3-betting me so much that I would have to narrow down his hand range for 3-betting as to some suited connectors and some trash. Then also a lot of Broadway cards like ace-jack, king-queen, king-jack, a lot of ace-10 even, a lot of these hands that are likely are to be the best hand, and he's just 3-betting so much that I think they have to be included in his range until I get a better idea of what he's doing. So continuing off that idea, when he doesn't 3-bet me pre-flop here, I still have all strong hands in my range. I can have aces, I can have queens, king-jack, whatever. But his range is significantly weakened by the fact that he didn't 3-bet and a very strong board came out. So this board, when he doesn't 3-bet, is kind of like a win for me. I am going to win this hand so much more often than I should, just because he is not balancing his 3-betting range enough at the outset, in my opinion. I could be far off on that, and he could have just gotten aces 3 times in a row, but I don't think that's the case. I think the fact that he's sitting there alone, he happens to be a regular, and I think he's just being pretty over-aggressive with his 3-betting range. And so when this board comes out, I don't have to bet very strong to push him off his hands, because I think at best he has a hand like queen-jack. And so he'll check call once, maybe, or check fold, and then on the turn I can just double barrel with impunity, because he cannot have a very strong range on this board with the pre-flop action. And he needs to balance his pre-flop range to flatten some strong hands. He doesn't have to necessarily flat aces or whatever, but he has to flat hands like king queen sometimes or ace jack, just so I can't just mercilessly double barrel him off all his hands right there, unless he randomly has like king jack or ace 10 or decides to look me up with ace 4, and those are all dangerous. And look me up with ace 4 is dangerous there, and the other ones are just not going to come along very often. And so I continue opening buttons, even though he's been very aggro on the right. I wanted him to keep being that aggro, just because I think he's going to slip up, and I can stack him in a couple of situations. It'd be better if we were deeper, and I could play a lot more hands, but since this is only a 100 big blind table, we don't have that option. On the left, I make a small bluff just because the action's lulled a little bit, and I don't think much is happening there. He 3-bets me again. I just immediately release. And when I release quickly to make it look like I'm a little frustrated. Like, oh, this guy's 3-betting me again. He's very aggro. I can't believe he's getting such good cards, or I'm whatever. And then I pick up kings, and he 3-bets again. It's just like the 5th time in 12 hands or something. And so I decide to 4-bet, which I think is a fairly reasonable conclusion to this hand. And then about 4 or 5 months ago, everyone decided, like when 4-bet bluffing was just running rampant, everyone in these, especially these mid-stake games, from what I saw, was just playing way too. They were just kind of, I hate to use that term, they were just out-leveling themselves. And they just, what they were doing is they're being like, okay, well, everyone knows I 3-bet light. And so when I 3-bet light, they're going to make their first 4-bet a bluff because they know I'm 3-betting light and I'm just going to give them credit for a hand the first time. And so as an extension to that, people went one step further and they were like, well, if they know, if they're 4-betting bluffing their first time a ton of the time, then I can 5-bet shove the first time they 4-bet and show a pretty big profit. And this was true against kind of robotic players, but against people that are thinking, it's obvious to me that he's just playing completely over aggro, and he's still in this mindset of like 3 and 4 months ago, where just like constantly 3-bet light, constantly do this stuff out of position. And now when I 4-bet, I just think it's going to induce so many shoves from lighter hands, and I just snap him off. He's got Jack 9. And you might be like, well, he's doing that in the same vein that I did the Ace-10 hand at the very start of the video. And I would disagree with that. And the reason is, on the Ace-10 hand, I knew for one that he couldn't have the nuts, because I had the nut heart. And I also thought, and my ranges might have been a little off with how often he pot controlled, but I thought my read was that he was a pretty competent regular, and that he was not going to check back marginal flush draws on that flop very often at all, and I thought there was a good chance that I could get him off these marginal made hands that he was raising me on the turn with, because I think if he had a hand like King Jack, he was going to raise the turn and then check the river. And so, and I had guaranteed equity no matter what he had. No matter what he had, I still had like 17, 18% equity, maybe 15%, but I was also getting a much better price on things I was doing in that regard. And the fact that I think it's just very important that I knew he couldn't have the nuts, and I thought he didn't have a very strong made flush or made set, 2-pair even, very often at all. And the problem is with this pre-flop aggression is you just have much less information. There's no flop, turn, or river, obviously. And so you're just kind of playing his 2 cards and just crossing your fingers and hoping that I'm on the same plane as you in terms of thought and that I'm 4-bet bluffing as my first 4-bet. And against a good player, that's not going to work very well because I'll be balancing when I'm doing that and how often I'm doing that. And against a bad player, they're just going to try to trap you and wait for a hand. So against either a good or bad player, that 5-bet bluff shove is just going to show a huge loss in my opinion. And now he's in a hole, and he's not just by being a 3-6 regular, heads-up regular, I just think he's not a seasoned enough heads-up player and able to handle being in a hole. Like, I was down a buy-in and a half to slopping you, and then I came back and I won 3 or so buy-ins from him. But that's because I've played a ton of heads-up, and I'm used to being down at higher stakes more money than this. But if this is his normal stake, he's going to be kind of a little down on himself. Why did I 5-bet shove that Jack 9? I could have just folded and just waited for a better spot, and then I'd still be even. He's just going to have a lot of doubts in his head that are going to just take him off his game a little bit. And so I think all of these reasons come to show why that 5-bet shove is just going to be a tough play and just not going to be profitable. I start to play a couple different opponents, and at one point I'm even 4-tabling against 4 different heads-up opponents. But nothing really goes on of note. Slopping you and I play for a little while, and there's a couple other sessions that I get going here. And then in general, I think this first video went pretty well. I'm excited to be a part of this card runners situation. I decided about a month ago I wanted to get into coaching. I've had a lot of interest in the past, and I think it will really just freshen up my view on poker in general and specifically Hold'em. I'm just going to wrap the video up here. This is my first video, so all feedback, critiques, and discussion are greatly appreciated. Either post in the comment section of this video or on the forums. I'll be a little more active over there under iRock, and so any questions, or if you want to just discuss any hands I played in this fashion, or really anything at all, always up for discussion, so just let me know through either of those avenues. All right, this is Scott Augustine for cardrunners.com.